Thank you for watching this video production of the Rocky Mountain Humanistic Counseling and Psychological Association. The Rocky Mountain Humanistic Counseling and Psychological Association is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We are striving to create the International Existential and Humanistic Archives and Training Center in Colorado Springs, Colorado. To find out more about our organization and upcoming events, please visit our website at www.rmhcpa.org. We hope that you will consider making a donation to support the Rocky Mountain Humanistic Counseling and Psychological Association and our mission of advancing humanistic psychology. Donations can be made through our website and our tax.
Welcome. I'm Dr. Louis Hoffman, the Executive Director of the Rocky Mountain Humanistic Counseling and Psychological Association. And I'm here today with Dr. Myrtle Heery to talk about the legacy of Jim Bugental. Dr. Heery brings 39 years of experience as a licensed marriage and family therapist with individuals, couples, families, and groups. She studied and co-taught with one of the founders of Existential Humanistic Psychology, Jim Bugental, for 25 years and was a lecturer in the psychology department at Sonoma State and associate core faculty at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology. She has served on as a chair and committee member of many outstanding doctoral dissertations that focus on existential humanistic and transpersonal psychology. She is currently the director of the International Institute for Humanistic Studies, where she offers training on the mindful application of existential humanistic psychotherapy, both nationally and internationally. She also has been honored with the Relevance Award in 2017, was the first woman to receive this award, and was honored as one of 5 outstanding women who have contributed to the field of humanistic psychology at the annual conference of the Society for Humanistic Psychology in 2012. She has spoken at numerous conferences nationally and internationally, and in various locations that include Beijing, Shanghai, Moscow, St. Petersburg, Vancouver, Edmonton, Mexico City, Zurich, and London. She also has several books, including Awakening to Aging, Glimpsing the Gifts of Aging, and Unearthing the Moment, Mindful Applications of Existential, Humanistic, and Transpersonal Psychology. So thank you, Myrtle, for being here with us today to talk about your mentor, colleague, and close friend, Jim Bugental. Maybe to start, can you share with us a little bit about how you met Jim Bugental?
Well, it's a very odd history, the meeting. I was in my doctoral work at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco, and I was required to go back in supervision. I already had a license, but I had to go back for the doctoral work to do more supervision. Mm-hmm. And I was in the San Francisco, Northern California Bay Area. You get in a car, you live in a car, and you drive a lot. Mm-hmm. And I was just exhausted from all this driving. So I called a very dear friend of mine who worked at Sonoma State, Ann Dreyfus, and I said, do you know anybody in Sonoma County that would supervise me for some cases? And I already had a caseload and everything. And she said, yeah, call Jim Bugental. He's an old friend of mine. Tell him I told you to call. And I said, okay. Who is he? She said, oh, doesn't matter. Just call him. So I called him. He picked up his phone, and I gave him Ann's name, and I said I needed somebody to supervise my cases and for my doctoral work for about a year. And would he be open to that? And he said, well, have you read any of my books? Are you ready? I said, have you written something? And he laughed. He thought that was the funniest thing. He said, can you get over here tomorrow at 9:30? And I said, sure. Are you going to take me on? And he said, maybe, but I don't want you to read anything I've written. I said, well, I didn't know you wrote anything. It's fine with me. I'm not into reading. Mm-hmm. I've had it with reading. I'm into my doctoral work. Yeah. So I went over there the next morning, and we got along great. And he had a great sense of humor. And he said, now you've got to promise me that you can't read anything I've written. said this to you before, but I don't want you reading. I said, I'm not interested in reading. I have about 25 clients. I need a supervisor because of this doctoral requirement. And she said, okay, no problem. So I didn't read anything. And it didn't come to me until maybe 8 or 9 months into this, that what he was doing was he'd never trained anybody that hadn't read any of his written work. And he wanted to find out if he could just have an experience of teaching somebody how to do this using the presence and the relationship. He didn't want me to know any theory. So very soon, within, 2, maybe 3 sessions, I was presenting cases to him. And, everything became centered around loss, death, anxiety. I didn't even know these words existed. And my clients started changing when I started talking to them about, well, what are your choices? Questions that he would say, ask them some questions. Don't make any statements. And remember, you just really don't know about people. I don't want you to give them any kind of diagnosis. Just see if you can be curious about them and ask them lots of questions. And don't say why. Ask what, when, where. Do never ask why. And those were kind of like my basics, right? And then he soon found out that I talk way too much. So he said, okay, I'm going to give you one more training. I want you, when the client stops talking, I want you to think, I'm going to now give a response with 7 words or less. Don't say anything more than 7 words. You're going to have to edit out those words because the person will listen to you a lot clearer and actually hear you with fewer words. So the words have to be powerful. And I tell you, to this day, I oftentimes use that with people I'm training or with therapists that call me for consultation about cases. I'll say 7 words or less, try it. And then you have to review what words are those words and never the word why, but they need to be questions that are 7 words or less. And I tell you, those were simple kind of cognitive behavior technique that really helped.
Yeah. So your approach with Jim, he really was seeking to embody that experiential approach to learning how to become a therapist.
Right. And it was in relationship to him and in relationship to the client. And oftentimes I would role play the client. I'll give you another story. There was a client that came to see me and she introduced herself as schizophrenic. I said, is your name schizophrenic? And she said, well, sadly, yes, because that's what all of the psychiatrists have told me. I said, okay. And so I took the case to Jim, reviewed it with him, and he said, see if you can find out if she's willing to explore her real biological name. See if she can bring her biological name into the room. Yeah. And we had to work on that for quite a while, but that was the goal, to see if we could get her biological name in the room. And I said, how come, Jim? And he said, you'll see what happens. When she finally says her own name, she will drop the label and she will start entering the skin of her name. Yeah. And it was beautiful to see that woman grow and change after she was no longer schizophrenic, but she had a name. Yeah. And she changed a lot. Yeah.
How would you describe the person of Jim? What was he like?
Jim could cry easily. That's the first thing that comes to me, because I don't cry easily. That's not a gift of mine, but I considered it a gift because he's a Caucasian man, older, that you usually, I usually don't see older Caucasian men crying. But if I presented a case like the schizophrenic client, his tears would just roll down his face. Oh my God, just to think she doesn't know her own name anymore. Yeah. He'd shake his head and cry, wipe his tears, and he says, okay, we got to get to work. We got to see if she can get her name back. Yeah. And he came from the heart. He was very, very bright, but his real work was his curiosity he had about people and the heart, from the heart, not the head. And I'm not saying he didn't use his head. I'm just saying the real work that I saw happen with myself and with my clients was from his heart.
Mm-hmm.
And he was always very curious about my life. I became pregnant when I was working with him, and he was very curious about my pregnancy and the baby. And he was just, and Elizabeth, his wife, was unbelievable. They had a fabulous relationship, and I became very close to both of them. And, there were what they call in psychology, that's good to have boundaries, right? Well, we had our boundaries, but I kind of make jokes of it because when you're speaking from the heart, there are no boundaries. It's just a lot of compassion and love that was conveyed not only to me, but then the ripple effect of conveying it to my clients. Yeah. So he was a very loving, kind, curious man. When he was dying, I had the great fortune to be with him. I think it was the day before he died. Elizabeth called me, so I went over and visited with him, and he said he was at home and all of his family was there and close colleagues and friends. And I went in the room and we were speaking, and he said, "Hey, by the way, do you think I'm dying right?" And I said, "Jim, what in the world?" He said, "Well, what do you think?" And I said, "Well, I've never seen you die, so I'll give you an A+ in dying. I mean, hospice is here, you're at home, Elizabeth's here, your family and friends are here, I'm here. So yeah, I think it's an A+ in dying. So good, I feel much better now." And then we both laughed. So he had this sense of humor of life that was very precious, because here he was facing his death and making a little bit of a lightheartedness of it.
Yeah.
And then we also had this disagreed about afterlife. And we had this discussion about what was going to happen when he died. And I said, "Well, you will continue on. I promise you will. I just know it." Because I'd had a near-death experience, and he sort of believed it. He didn't. But anyway, I said, "Well, if I'm right, will you send me a message?" He said, "I will. I'll send you a very concrete message." I said, "Okay, I'll be waiting." So sure enough, about a month after he died, I was in my office, and there was this poster on the wall that had been there for years. And all of a sudden, it just fell to the floor. And the poster said on there, individual transformation, universal responsibility. And it fell on my foot. And I thought, "Is that you, Jim? That's interesting." And I moved it aside. The client came in, did the session, and then I went to my mailbox to get my mail. Didn't think much about the poster. In the mail, and I almost threw it in the garbage, but I thought, I'll open it. It was from the mortuary. And I opened this thing, and it said, "This week and this week only, we have a special on cremation. Get your cremation, pay for your cremation now. It's 50% off." I was in hysterics. I called Elizabeth immediately. I said, "Do you think this is Jim?" And she said, "Absolutely, that is Jim."
Yeah.
So I think he got that something energetically goes on, and I still feel very connected to him. I do right now as we're talking.
Yeah.
I feel his presence, his caring, his love. I'll tell you, the quality that was lacking in him was judgment of others. He didn't have that.
Yeah.
And I can have that, and I used to have it really loud.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I learned to do being raised in the South, is you make judgments.
Yeah.
Jim, he did not make judgments of other human beings. It was an amazing quality to watch.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a mentor once that he had made a couple of bad hires at a clinic, and he came in and sat down one day and he said, "I should never be allowed to hire again. I'm a terrible judge of character." And then he sat there for a few minutes and a few moments, and then he said, "Maybe that's why I'm such a good therapist."
That's great. I love it.
Reminds me of him there.
Yeah, that's true. The lack of judgment and the curiosity needs to be there, which is what Jim had. It's tremendous. He was very curious about dying. He
Yeah.
wasn't frightened. He wasn't like mortified of it or weeping about it. He really did not like the idea of leaving Elizabeth.
Yeah.
But they used to have this beautiful blue heron that would come in the backyard during the last portion of his life. And after he did die, Elizabeth would call me and say, well, the blue heron's here. He's visiting. And it was so sweet the way they were connected to nature. He was particularly, and Elizabeth.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of Elizabeth, they did some work together and also just had a wonderful close relationship. How do you see her influencing Jim and his approach?
Well, I think Elizabeth had an interesting impact on him the way she did on me and that I did on Jim also. And it had to do with this clinic, this nonprofit clinic that they ran in Santa Rosa, California, where they trained clinicians, and it was low-cost counseling for people who couldn't afford therapy. So Elizabeth was, before, in her previous years, had been a nun. And she left that and met Jim and married him and started this family life. And her heart was so big for helping other people that when they came to Santa Rosa, California, they started this marvelous clinic that, is basically free. Or some people paid maybe 10 cents to have therapy. And I think she opened Jim up to the sense of connecting to community and remembering the importance of being connected to community.
Yeah. What do you see as Jim's primary legacy and how he influenced the field of professional psychology?
Well, that's interesting. I think there are two things. One is the relationship, the actual relationship, the present in the moment relationship, what's happening in the moment, like what's happening between you and I right now, not what happened the minute before or what's going to happen the minute next, but right this minute. That's what he gave to the world of therapy. It's this minute. The client talks about something, and the most important thing to ask yourself as a clinician is, how is that talk about happening right this minute between me and this client right now? How is that happening? And that is powerful. When you can get that in the room, then it's powerful stuff.
Yeah. I think I appreciate you mentioning that, because I think it's one of the misunderstandings is that a lot of people see Jim as really focusing on the interpersonal and that here and now work. But what you're describing is that certainly he did focus on that, but he also had a great valuing of the relationship and what was happening in the here and now in the relationship.
And the other piece, which is very important, is resistance. Like how the client and you, even as a clinician, resist the moment, how you can. He said what his big challenge was as a clinician was to have a client who was really intellectual and loved to talk about books. Because he said, once I got somebody like that in the room, I could just slip off into that world because I love books. And then I realized I wasn't helping this person. We were just talking about the best books we ever read, right?
Yeah.
And that became the resistance, the reading and the books. And he began to name the resistance of not being in the present. And, a lot of people do that with trauma. They talk about trauma instead of like be in the moment. What is being traumatized in the room as you even speak about the trauma? About the trauma. Is something happening in the room that's traumatic? How is it happening? How can we heal that? We certainly don't want you to continue to be traumatized, that's for sure. So I would say presence and resistance are, for me, his legacy, presence and resistance.
And with the resistance, not just the client's resistance, but the therapist's resistance.
The therapist resistance. The therapist resisting. I remember talking to him about a client who was a therapist who was maybe going to be diagnosed with terminal cancer. We weren't sure, but she was going to hear within a week. And I was about as upset about it as she was. And I was talking to Jim about it. And he said, well, what will happen if she is diagnosed with it? And I said, oh, it's going to be so sad. She just retired. She's living the life she wanted to live. And now she's got cancer. And he said, and what if she dies? Then what? And I said, oh my God, I'd miss her so much.
Yeah.
And he said, well, are you going to tell her that? I said, oh my God, I forgot. And he said, that's important, Myrtle.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, I got to tell you, when you die, I'm going to miss you because you mean a lot to me.
Yeah.
So I brought it back to the room because I knew what was happening.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
It wasn't a talk about the client. It was him and me and our relationship. And I don't think I ever said that to him before then.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So I learned from experience, not from books with Jim, experience.
Yeah.
And he always called it the ING, the ing, the experiencing, not the experience, but the ING, which meant it was moving.
Yeah.
It was happening. It wasn't static.
Yeah.
And who we can become is not who we were yesterday. We're becoming. Yeah.
What do you think Jim would say about the current pandemic and its relevance for therapy and living?
Well, what's an interesting question? Thank you. I had someone email me and say, wouldn't Jim be furious about this Zooming and online therapy? I said, no, he wouldn't be at all.
Yeah.
He'd be right with it in the moment, like be so excited that we could still see people. And he would adapt and use it and talk about the limitations of it with the client. And he'd be excited that we would have it. So how he would be is he would just be right in there working online with people like most of us are, and doing consultations like I'm doing online and working with clients online. He would be using the computer.
Yeah.
And he'd also be taking very good care of himself. He'd be doing a lot of self-care and knowing, like I said earlier, his tears, he would be so upset by the numbers of people who have died from this virus. I think you remember the book Tuesdays with Maury.
Yeah. Yeah. Lovely book.
He loved that. He loved that book. And he said, as I age, because Maury apparently would watch the evening news and cry watching the news. And Jim said, as I've aged, I start crying watching the evening news because of the sadness and the depth of tragedy in the world. So I know he would be crying.
Yeah.
And he would also carry hope and courage, resilience and tolerance. And compassion for all those qualities that we are teaching in the Institute. He would embody those, and he'd face it with a lot of courage.
Yeah. Yeah. You worked with Jim right up until his death and stayed close with him right up until his death. What can you share about how he faced his stroke and his own mortality, and any lessons that we can take from that?
Oh, what a wonderful question. You're such a good questioner. It's a gift. It's a great gift to ask good questions, because that what you're doing right now is what Jim used to say is the essence of therapy, is asking good questions. And these are good questions. Well, one of the things is Jim's memory was not good after the stroke.
Yeah.
So I would often go and give Elizabeth breaks so she could get her hair done, get a manicure, and I'd take him to lunch. We would drive a little ways to going to lunch, and he'd say, where are we going? And I'd say, to lunch. And then we get to the next stoplight, and he'd say, where are we going? I said, to lunch. And then third stoplight, he'd ask again, and my knuckles on the steering wheel would be getting white. He said, you are angry. And I said, yep. I am angry. And he said, is it because I keep asking you where we're going? And I said, yep. And he said, well, what could we do about it? I mean, it's not good to be angry. And I said, nope. I said, I tell you what, Jim, the next time you ask me where we're going, can I make up where we're going and just, we could be going anywhere? And he said, if that helps you, then do it. Next stoplight, where are we going? I said, we're going to China and we're going to go see the circus and we're going to have so much fun. He said, oh, if we're going to China, we got to go back and get Elizabeth. She would want to go too. I said, no, Jim, we're not really going to China, but at least we can laugh. So what I learned from him is to laugh and to lighten up, to use your imagination, to not go down in a rabbit hole like Alice in Wonderland and be depressed about you don't have your memory. He didn't really care that he couldn't remember these books he wrote. And some of the people would come and say, oh, he doesn't know the book. He doesn't remember his book. And I say, so what? The book was written 10 years ago. Who cares? I mean, he's at lunch with me right now. Sometimes he would talk to the waitress and the waitress would sit down, pull up a chair and sit down and start telling Jim her life story. I go, Jim, we're not doing this. And he says, yes, we are. She needs to talk to somebody. So and this was after his stroke, right? Yeah. And by the time we got home, he didn't know that he'd gone to lunch and talked to the waitress about her problem. That was gone. So he was in the moment. And the tendency, if your brain is remembering all the time, is to remember and to carry that forward. And I think one of the lessons is that resentments and hostilities that we carry can really be dropped if you stay in the moment. That's what I saw with Jim. Yeah. He didn't resent not having a memory. Yeah. He just embraced living in the moment. And Elizabeth used to say, he's living what he wrote about. Yeah. He's living it. He's not talking about it because he couldn't remember a lot of things. Yeah. I remember him saying that at one of the trainings too, that he made a comment, and there was about 30, 35 of us in the room. And he said, I spent my entire life talking about the here and now that's all I have left. And he just started laughing, this very hearty laugh, and then switched like that to crying, very vulnerably crying. Yeah. And when he was done, he just said, I'm okay. We can go on. Yeah. Yeah. He was fine. And he would turn to me after doing something like that. He's good. Where's my coffee? Could I have my coffee? Yeah. Yeah. The openness to that was so beautiful. You don't see it often. No. And actually, it was a blessing. I have one of his students and gentleman I did the Awakening to Aging book with, neuropsychologist Greg Richardson, said to me, he said, really, when you lose your memory, you're in a state of consciousness that Buddhists practice and die to be there. Mm-hmm. You don't remember things. You don't carry things around. You really do let go. There's no way that you can hold on. You're in the moment. And if the people around that person also let go, you're in this beautiful state of the present tense. Yeah. 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 What do you think Jim's advice would be to therapists today if he was around? Wow. Another good question. What his advice be? Well, I'm going to say it. Love yourself. Yeah. Yeah. Really fall in love with yourself first. All of the foibles, the things you don't like about yourself, embrace them, love them, and laugh about them. And love all the things you already love about yourself, but especially your foibles, your imperfections, the things that you wish nobody knew about. Just embrace them, hold them tight, squeeze them, and really fall in love with you. Yeah. And when you do that, then you're helping another human being, because they will admire and respect you and want to be in the state you're in. Yeah. If you're in a state of dislike of yourself or criticizing yourself, you're not going to inspire the person in front of you. Yeah. So it kind of comes back again to that foundational existential humanistic ideas. We develop the person of the therapist, and then they have that way of being that is healing that they can implement. Yes. Yes, it's the person in front of you.
Yeah.
And for Jim, I think the gift is that it didn't stop in when you walked outside that therapy office. It was a way of being in the world.
Yeah.
I was in Whole Foods today, and this woman who was helping me behind the cheese counter telling me about this wonderful blueberry cheese. It was so delicious. Why didn't I buy some? And I said, okay. I said, oh, I'm not buying it because it's expensive. She said, oh, here's a cheaper one. So I got the cheaper one. I said, well, I'm so glad you helped me, and I hope your business is doing well. And she said, well, all of our supplies, major supplies, come from Austin, Texas. So, and with the Texas shut down during the freeze, we're actually not doing so well. We're just scared, and tears started welling up in her eyes and in my eyes. And I said, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I'll keep you in the light. I'll think positive for you. She said, oh, but it's just been wonderful to show you about the blueberry cheese.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that to me is an example of how I try to live in the moment with people in the grocery store.
Yeah.
It's not just you practice it when you're doing psychotherapy. You become what you're talking about in that office.
Yeah. 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 Well, thank you, Myrtle. I think that's a beautiful way for us to kind of wrap up here. And I'm so thankful that I got the opportunity not just to do the training with you and Jim about 20 years ago now, but also to get a chance to see the relationship that the two of you had. That was really something to learn from too, and it was just beautiful to see that connection that you had there. Really embodies so much of existential humanistic psychology. So,
well, thank you. I have to share one last hilarious thing. When we were teaching together one time, one of the students imitated me and Jim. And it was a skit they did. And the student was Jim, and she was standing behind the person who was me and whispering loudly in my ear, sell the book, sell the book.
Yeah.
So he was concerned about selling his books.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I hope that ends on a light note. Jim wrote many wonderful books. The last one he wrote was Psychotherapy Isn't What You Think, and it's a great book. So I'm going to sell the book.
Yeah. I'm sure he appreciates that.
He will appreciate it. I'm selling the book. Okay, take good care.
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Follow the Rocky Mountain Humanistic Counseling and Psychological Association on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn. To find out more information about our MHCPA, join our organization or sign up for updates about continuing education workshops and conferences. Visit our website at www.rmhcpa.org.